Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hi, I post true crime content like this every single week. So if that's something you're interested in, hit that subscribe button, give it a like, put your post notifications on so you don't miss when I post a brand new video. Today we're doing the Hello Kitty murder, which is a very heavy case. There's lots of... I'm going to give you all the content warnings. Rape, sexual torture, like... just a lot of horrible things. So I would understand if you wanted to miss out on this case, and I will see you in my next video if that's the case. But speaking of cases, let's get on to this one. May of 1999, a 14-year-old girl showed up at a police station in Tsim Sha Tsui in Hong Kong. There's a lot of foreign names, so I'm going to butcher all of them, so I'm so sorry. She was showing signs of heavy distress, and she began telling police about these nightmares that she had been having and that she was being haunted by a ghost. The police didn't do much at first because in walks this 14-year-old girl talking about being haunted by ghosts and having nightmares, which usually this isn't really a police matter. They listen to her and let her get all that needs to... She let it all off her chest. She tells them that the ghost is that of a woman that was murdered and tortured in the apartment that she'd been staying in, which was on Granville Road. The police didn't really believe her because she's a 14-year-old girl who, again, was talking about ghosts, and she could easily have just made it all up. But then she mentioned that she had actually participated in the torture and murder of this woman. This is when police were like, hold up, if this girl is admitting to like participating in this torture and murder of this woman, then maybe it's something that they would have to investigate. The police asked the girl to take them to this apartment, which was situated in the Kowloon area. Now, back then, I'm not sure about now, but back then this area wasn't a very nice one. The buildings were built oddly and honestly could have fallen down at any point. Once the police arrived at the apartment, they instantly realised that everything the girl had told them was actually true. The apartment was all gross, dirty and dark, but then it was all covered in Hello Kitty merchandise. Police were confused how this 14-year-old girl had been involved in a torture and murder until they found out that she had a 34-year-old boyfriend. This 14-year-old girl had run away from home in 1998. She didn't get on with her family and just hated her home. The girl was living on the streets, and this is how she met her 34-year-old boyfriend, which not really boyfriend, it's grooming, but it's sick. Now, as you can imagine, this guy was very dangerous. He was into some very shady businesses. The girl was on the streets, she began doing sex work and began taking drugs, and then this led to an addiction. Because of this, she got involved with a group of Triad members. The Triad are an organised crime group, and they do some very scary and shady things. Her boyfriend was part of the Triad, and together he, the girl who was 13 at the time, and two associates tortured and murdered a woman in a random apartment. So the victim in this case is a 23-year-old woman named Fan Man Yi. Her family had abandoned her at a very young age, and she ended up at the Ma Tu Wai girls' home. At the age of 16, the girls' home would kick you out. I'm not sure if that applied to like all the homes, but it happened at the one she was staying at. However, yeah, she was kicked out at 16 and was left to fend for herself. She was left on the streets and she formed a drug addiction, and to fund this addiction she began doing sex work. She would work at brothels and nightclubs and would also work on the streets. In May of 1996, she was working at the Empress Karaoke nightclub. There she almost managed to turn her life around, and she met the love of her life, and then they got married. They moved in together and even had a son. The relationship between Fan Man-yi and her husband was pretty rocky. Her husband was also addicted to drugs. Neighbours would report instances where they heard very loud domestic abuse taking place. Her husband had been abusing her the whole time they were together, and this caused the breakdown of their marriage. In 1997, Fan Man-yi began working at Romance Villa, which was a nightclub and brothel in the Kowloon district. This club was a place where triad members would often frequent. This is where Fan Man-yi met a man named Chan Man-lok. He became a frequent client of hers, and she was kind of his favourite sex worker at the club. He would pay her for longer sessions. They would do ice during these sessions, and Fan Man-yi knew he was a member of the triad, so she already knew the type of man that she was involved with. March of 1999, despite knowing the type of guy Chan was and the connections that he had, Fan Man-yi decided to steal his wallet. Now, they were high on ice when this happened, and Chan had around 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, which is about £400. So even though they were both high on ice at the time, it was just the two of them in the room, so it was pretty obvious who had taken his wallet. Chan Man-lok goes up to Fan Man-yi and tells her that she has to pay back the 4,000 and then an additional 10,000 for disrespecting him. He threatened that he would hurt her if he didn't get his money. He quickly managed to repay the 4,000, however, she asked for more time to be able to get the 10,000. Chan, being the dangerous triad member that he is, he doesn't want to hear it. He expected her to run away before even paying him, so his bright idea was to kidnap her. On the 17th of March 1999, 34-year-old Chan Man-lok, his two associates, 27-year-old Long Shing Cho and 21-year-old Long Wai Lun, kidnapped 23-year-old Fan Man-yi from her home. Wow, that was a sentence. They took her to an apartment which Chan Man-lok owned, which was situated on Granville Road. Man-lok's plan was to invite all his associates and friends to come to the apartment to have sex with her, and then she would be able to pay back her debts. On the first night of Fan Man-yi's captivity, the men were high on ice and decided they would rape and beat her all night. They used her as their own personal punching bag. And over the next month, the men would torture 23-year-old Fan Man-yi. So at this point, I'm gonna start talking about like the actual torture. So if you want to skip this, then I'll try put a timestamp on screen. So the group of men loved to use many different items to beat and torture Fan Man-yi. They would use lots of kitchen utensils and appliances in their torture. They would melt plastic straws over her body so the hot plastic would drip onto her skin. They especially did this to her feet to stop her from being able to get up and escape, which is actually just horrible. Can't imagine that. They would beat her with pipes and metal bars, and then they would hit her wounds with sticks. They would make her pretend to be happy and smile during her torture, and they would make her tell them how excited she was that she was going to be beaten. If she failed to do this, then they would beat her even harder than they already were. Due to all the beatings and torture, Manlock's associates had become less attracted to her. She was covered in cuts, blood, bruises, so they stopped paying for sex with her. Now that Chan Manlock had realised that he could get no more money out of her, the torture just grew to a whole nother level. And you'd think it can't get much worse. That sounds pretty bad, like awful. But once you hear what happens next, the men would pour chili oil into her open wounds, which would burn. They would pour the chili oil and oyster sauce into her eyes, which that just sounds so painful. This next bit, so sick. They would urinate and rub feces into her wounds, and they would also make her consume it, like the feces and the urine, which... no. And they would force her to drink chili oil and motor oil. They would also deprive her of any normal foods. If she refused to eat any of the feces or oils or urine, then they would just beat her. Fan Man Yi at this point was so weak, and obviously because she was deprived of any nutritional foods, she had barely any strength left in her. Regardless of the wounds on her feet, even if she wanted to, realistically she didn't have the strength to escape. At this point, the men were becoming bored of torturing Fan Man Yi. She was so weak and she really wasn't reacting to the torture anymore, which is so sad. But imagine being so sick in the head that you can be bored of it because you're so used to doing it. Actually, just disgusting. Men tied her up to the hooks in the ceiling with electrical wires to make it easier for them to beat her. They would again beat her with metal bars and pipes and would just leave her to hang overnight. Meanwhile, they are just chilling in the room over, you know, playing video games, that type of thing, while they have a half-dead woman hanging in their apartment. One time, the girl, who was 13 at the time, remember her, yeah? She witnessed her boyfriend Chan Manlock kicking Fan Man Yi in the head over 50 times, and she even participated in this. In fact, she participated in a lot of this torture. A month after Fan Man Yi's abduction, the group went out into the town for the night. They left Fan Man Yi locked in the bathroom until they came back to the apartment. The group returned a few hours later and went straight to bed without even deciding to check on Man Yi. In the morning, the 13-year-old girl gets up to go to the bathroom. She goes in and she finds 23-year-old Fan Man Yi dead in the bath. There had been a raid on the lower floor in the apartment block again. Like I said, this was not the best of areas. It must have been like heavily crimed. Like that area must have just had a lot of crime. Even though Hong Kong had like, I think it was a crime rate of 1.23 per 1,000 people, which is quite low for a major city anyway. There had been a rape, and so the police were in the apartment building and the group began to panic as they had a dead woman in their apartment. The group split off for the day, coming up with plans of how to dispose of the body. The next day they all met up and Manlock, being the bad man that he is, he's like, I don't care about any of your ideas, we're going with mine. His plan was to dismember the body as it would be way too obvious and risky to dispose of the body in one piece. Manlock got a butcher's knife and starts dismembering her head. The other men are pulling off flesh to boil off the muscles off the bones. Remove her organs, putting them in bags for later disposal. The whole dismemberment process took the group around 10 hours to complete. They would bag her flesh and organs and put them in the fridge. The 13-year-old girl was involved in this as well. She was putting bags in the fridge and she was boiling things. Long Xing Cho boiled Man Yi's head and got the 13-year-old girl to come and have a look at it. The girl was saying that she didn't want to, she was too scared. But Xing Cho told her to pretend like it was just in a movie. And she came out later and said that it really did look like something from a movie. Again, as I said before, this whole process took 10 hours and the group got hungry. I don't know how you have an appetite after you've just tortured and murdered and dismembered someone, but they were hungry. They had noodles which they cooked on the stove, and get this, they even used the same spoon which they had used to stir Man Yi's head. They used that to stir their noodles as well. Once the head was just a skull, they got a Hello Kitty doll and cut it open, and then stuffed the skull inside of it before sewing it back up. This is why this case is known as the Hello Kitty murder. When the 14-year-old girl had come to the police station with her report, she had taken them to the apartment. All that was left behind was a skull stuffed in the Hello Kitty doll, the organs and flesh in the fridge, and a tooth which was just left on the floor. Without a body, the police couldn't really determine a cause of death, and they couldn't prove the story that the girl had given, that they were all involved in the torture and murder. The girl was sticking to this story, however, the men were saying that she was a drug addict and that she had an overdose on meth. They claimed that she overdosed on meth and that they didn't want to get in trouble for allowing a death under their care, so they decided to dismember and dispose of the body. The police, understandably, obviously, didn't buy this story at all. Even if the men's story was true, they still allowed a death and dismembered the body, so they were getting charged with something already. There was no evidence of the torture and murder, so the men were only able to be charged with manslaughter, which is so frustrating. At trial, the 13-year-old girl testified in court about the whole torture and murder and she was given full immunity. And I'm sure her age contributed to that, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. I don't think that's right. Even if you testify, you still participated in it, so should have some sort of like repercussions, but the men's trial went on for 6 weeks. The men were turning on each other, like just pointing the fingers. It was like, he did it, he did it, he did it, he did it, and they were all just denying. Fan Man Yi's ex-husband testified at trial and called the men out for lying. He said that Man Yi could not possibly have overdosed on meth because she had stopped her meth use before her son was born. So they had broken down the defence's argument of the meth overdose. So in December of 2000, the men were all sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years, which meant their minimum term would have been up in 2020. So I couldn't find if they've been released or not. I'm hoping not, because they've tortured and murdered a woman. So I'm guessing they're not out, but They were all given psychological evaluations and none were deemed to have any mental issues. The media went crazy for this case. Articles were made with disgusting titles such as "Girl Eats Shit and Piss." People were photoshopping pictures of her beaten head onto sexy anime characters and just being disgusting. There were movies made about this case. One was called "There's a Head in My Soup" and another was called "Human Pork Chop." If that's not distasteful, I do not know what is. People believe that because the young girl was being haunted by Fan Man Yi's spirit, that it was a good idea to go to the apartment and try to contact her. Fortunately, in 2012, the building was demolished, and in 2016, a hotel was built on that lot. So remember, Fan Man Yi had a son, yeah? He was 2-year-old at the time of the case, so unfortunately, he doesn't really remember that much about his mother. However, he is, or he was, a student in Singapore, and the police gave him his mother's necklaces, and he wears them every day to honour her. So that's it for today's case. A very, very disturbing and heavy one. I will try not to do such disturbing cases in a row. Yeah. This is my first video back of the year, so give it a like. Comment what you think of this case down below. I'm really interested on this one especially. I have a case request form down below. Please put cases in that, because I'm struggling at the minute to know what cases to do. Yeah, that's all I have. If you want to subscribe, I'll put a circle on here, and I'll put a playlist of more videos also on the screen. And I'll see you in my next case. Bye.